Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Back to Gosho. I've made a few topic-related videos lately, and I like to take a little break. There's so many Gosho, and we're rapidly coming to the end of all the letters, so maybe want to savor this experience a little bit more. I don't know, whatever the reason. Sometimes I get emails from you who have specific questions, and sometimes those questions are in some way quite related to many other questions that pop up from time to time. I think in general, we don't always have the time or the patience to do a little search through the channel and find related videos, and we just want an answer immediately. And I like to be as responsive as I can be, but sometimes when it looks like I'm going to respond to the same basic question several times, I think, well, if this is such a burning issue, I should probably do a video dedicated to it. So in that way, your comments, your emails to me enliven a need for me to explore not only an answer for your specific question, but maybe more generally an answer surrounding your questions that could benefit lots of people in our Sangha. So if you generally, I'll respond to your email as well. I like to do that so that I acknowledge that you've asked me a question and that I'm either working on a video or answering you directly. Often the two happen at the same time. I'll produce a video about a subject that I think that's a good question and I should answer that in general. But I try to respond to each one of your emails, and I apologize if it looks like maybe I hadn't. Maybe look on the channel and see if there isn't a video where your question was elevated to the, if you will, to the dedication of a video. So everyone's question is important, or significant, maybe is a better word. Today we're going to read The Treasure of a Filial Child. And so Nichiren is responding to a lady. We've heard him talk to her, Senichi, I think is her name, when Nichiren was exiled to Sado. There are inhabitants, there are people who live on Sado. It's a kind of a foreboding place, very harsh winters, and but nonetheless populated, not like the rest of the mainland of Japan, but populated today, certainly. But then, in 13th century Japan, her husband, who had passed away the year before, at age 91, had been a Nembutsu follower until Nichiren moved or exiled out to that island. He met Nichiren and was immediately taken with Nichiren and started following Nichiren's doctrine and teachings and scholarship of the Lotus Sutra. And so too did the rest of his family, his wife and their children. Even at his advanced age, Abutsubo, the husband in this case, when Nichiren was pardoned and moved himself to Minobu, kind of a secluded location in Japan, even in his advanced age, Abutsubo went out there like 3 times to bring him provisions and make offerings, and no doubt to learn. This letter was written to Abutsubo's wife, Senichi, as I said earlier, a year after his passing, approximately. And what had happened in the meantime is that she had sent her son, Abutsubo's son, out to Minobu to bring Nichiren provisions and no doubt, converse and exchange stories and to learn scholarship. So Nichiren takes this opportunity, number one, to acknowledge Butsubo's passing. And because the sun is now coming out and bringing him provisions and so forth, he recognizes that for a woman, not just Shinichi alone, but for women in general, having a, quote, good son, a filial son, who tries diligently to follow in the footsteps of his father and respect his family, that kind of thing, is truly an amazing reward in life, in samsaric life, but no less so in our Buddhist life, our Buddhist practice. So he takes this opportunity. It's quite a lengthy letter, so I'm sure we won't finish it today, but lots of really good, interesting stories from the Buddhist sutras and writings regarding our interrelationships and this filial bond that we have with siblings, with offspring, with parents, so on and so forth. So, without further ado, let's dive in, shall we? He begins. I was deeply grieved to hear the news about the wife of the lay priest of Ko. Please tell her that I think very fondly of her. So this must be a friend of Kenichi, right? I want to make sure I'm saying her name right. I apologize. I should have checked that before I started reading. Memory being what it is, not always replied to the wife of the late Abutsubo. Well, that's not her name. Where did I see her name? Senichi. I was right. No, I said Kenichi, right? It's Senichi. Apologies. All right. I have received your various gifts of 1,500 coins, laver, seaweed, and dried rice, and I have respectfully reported this in the presence of the Lotus Sutra. So, obviously, he's the votary of the Lotus Sutra, but he appreciates her gifts on the level of his continued practice of Bodhisattva superior practices, in other words, the votary of the Lotus Sutra. Much more meaningful than just a gift to Nichiren the man. He's acknowledging that this gift has the sincerity that extends far beyond simply Nichiren, but his mission, right? So in this way, it's a reward to them. The Lotus Sutra says, quote, if there are those who hear the law, then not a one will fail to attain Buddhahood. Although this passage consists of but 10 characters, to read even a single phrase of the Lotus Sutra is to read without omission all the sacred teachings preached by the thus come one, Shakyamuni, during his lifetime. So this speaks to something you've heard me say before, is that when we chant Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, the title of the Lotus Sutra, we immediately invoke the entire teachings, both the essential and the not provisional one. What's the word we use there? But the preparatory teachings of the Lotus Sutra for the essential teachings of the Lotus Sutra. So the Lotus Sutra in itself is a complete teaching, sometimes called a circular teaching, not because of its logic, but because it consists of the entirety of Shakyamuni's enlightenment, his path to enlightenment, his accomplishment of enlightenment, and his being enlightened. From beginning to end, the Lotus Sutra, especially with its introductory chapter and its closing chapter, the innumerable meanings and the universal virtue chapter, is a very complete teaching in and of itself. But it also stands on all of the teachings of Shakyamuni's lifetime, because all of those teachings, provisional as they are, lead to the capacity to invoke and enjoin oneself single-mindedly with exactly the same awakening, the same enlightenment, the same Buddhahood as Shakyamuni himself achieved. So this is what Nichiren is again referencing, is that even one phrase of the Lotus Sutra contains within it all of this scholarship. Ipso facto, based on the Lotus Sutra and your practice of Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, if you then dip your feet into the waters of the Lankavatara, or the perfection of wisdom, so on and so forth, in reference to your practice of the Lotus Sutra, not as an option to, what you will gain from those sutras is the step-by-step procedures, if you will, of awakening and understanding the foundations underpinning the concepts in the Lotus Sutra. So you'll only add to your insights in your practice of Myoho Renge Kyo. And this is why I'm such a fan of study, because you may be able to read the Lotus Sutra alone and gain all the insight you need in order to invoke your Buddha nature. Don't get me wrong. But for me, there are so many concepts in the Lotus Sutra that call out to me that I don't quite get the breadth and depth of something that doesn't seem to be delved into its minutia. And so when I see something that looks shiny on the surface, I like to know why it's shiny. That's just me, and maybe we're all that way. And so I had to extend my study outside the Lotus Sutra in order to then understand what these concepts in the Lotus Sutra, which are referenced, what they actually embodied. For me, that was a great benefit to the depth of my insight as to what a simple sentence might be in the Lotus Sutra, what it referenced, and how Shakyamuni got to that. That was a lot of amazement for me, and maybe that's just my samsaric life and what I needed in order to light the switch and get the insights that I needed to understand fully the Lotus teaching. But, you know, again, I would read statements like Nichiren's here, very simple sentence, but for me had the tremendous onus of understanding what the heck he was talking about. When he says that to read even a single phrase of the Lotus Sutra is to read without omission all the sacred teachings preached by the thus come one Shakyamuni during his lifetime, sort of called out to me that I was failing in a way, not knowing what teachings he preached. If I was to practice them without omission, it seemed like I owed a debt of, call it gratitude, call it just some kind of an experience of those teachings, to then understand the depth to which the single phrase of the Lotus Sutra was, what potential it presented in my life, right? So, therefore, the great teacher Miao says, quote, if in propagating the Lotus Sutra one is to interpret even one of its doctrines, so that speaks to me even more, right? One of its doctrines may just be a referential statement within the Lotus Sutra to an other sutra. I kind of need to know what that other sutra is to understand the meaning of that statement, don't I? One must take into consideration all the Buddha's lifetime of teachings and master them from beginning to end. Well, I didn't need to hear any more than that to know, okay, I need to study, right? To me, that's Miao Lo saying, if you want to know the true meaning of what you're reading in the Lotus Sutra and how to practice Myoho Renge Kyo, you ought to know all of Shakyamuni's teachings. Even though what you say references all of the teachings, if you don't know the teachings, then you don't understand the reference. So there's the scholarship of Buddhism, right? By beginning, quote unquote, he means the Flower Garland Sutra, and by end, he means the Nirvana Sutra. Well, there it is, plain and simple. The Flower Garland Sutra was preached at the time when the Buddha had first attained the way, when the great Bodhisattva Dharma wisdom, forced of merits, and others responding to the request of a Bodhisattva called Moon of Deliverance, preached in the Buddha's presence. I do not know in what form this sutra may exist in India, in the Dragon King's palace, or in the Tushita heaven, but it has been brought to China in a 60-volume version, an 80-volume version, and a 40-volume version. In the case of the last of the teachings, the Nirvana Sutra, I again do not know in what form it may exist in India or in the Dragon King's palace, but in our country it exists in a 40-volume version, a 36-volume version, a 6-volume version, and a 2-volume version. So there were many translations, as I've talked about before, as these teachings and sermons that were put to paper in Sanskrit from those who had memorized each and every one of them. How those translations then moved about India through different schools, and how they then were discovered by Chinese explorers or Indian explorers coming to China, and what portions they may have brought with them, or what portions were extant at the time the Chinese explorers went there. That's why you have these varied volumes, and also varied translators. Chinese translators as well as Indian translators, right? So this is why when you study the scholarship of Buddhism, it's immense, believe me, especially through academia, not just through the Buddhist scholarship, but the academic scholarship of exploring these ancient teachings. There's often a comparative or a collective translation that then embodies chunks from different extant writings. All right, just like Kumarajiva wrote several different versions of the Lotus Sutra, because he was contending with some chapters not existing in some compendiums and some assemblages missing a lot. So the 28 chapters that Kumarajiva finally settled on were his scholarship of study of all of these remnants from India, and deciding from his own scholarly study of not just the Lotus but many other sutras, that the proper order of each chapter and which to include and which looked like they were added by some sectarian teacher. And so what we have today now are not only Chinese translations, but multiple Chinese and Japanese translations of Kumarajiva's scholarship, and then even more academic scholarship in English or French or Spanish translations, or Vietnamese or other Chinese contemporary scholarship, then imposing their own scholarly academic qualifications and cultural bias. So when we study, we have to realize that we are seeing through some other culture's eyes, some other bias's eyes, what were the original teachings of Shakyamuni. And the only way to pile drive through that and make sure that you're not being swayed by an inappropriate bias, as you know, when I did the playlist on the Lotus Lectures, I go through each chapter of the Lotus Sutra. I used 5 different translations, if only to demonstrate that even if one, like H. Kern's translation of the Lotus Sutra, is an old English from the 19th century, the late 1800s, there's a lot of vocabulary in there about the Lord and faith and all of these words. It's not because H. Kern was deliberately trying to mislead the student of Buddhism. I don't believe that at all, although that may be true in some cases. I think even historically, you'll read Nichiren make reference to certain translations where there was an intent of disparaging Buddhism. It may not be Nichiren who said that. There may be somewhere else I read that. At any rate, caution, right? But even so, if you understand that this is a bias, and it's obvious in the language, you can sort of set it aside, and you can understand that this is a scholar trying desperately to understand these Buddhist concepts in the vernacular that to him somehow encapsulates an idea, albeit inadequate, or to H. Kern may have seemed very exciting that he could make this equating of concepts to his own bias of his cultural inculcated beliefs in Western religion, and see this parallel. Later in our day, that parallel is very misleading because that's not anything to do with Buddhism. You know, religion has a lot of mystical, magical concepts in it that aren't a part of Buddhist teaching at all. But some of the great stories of Buddhism play with this idea of magical, mystical concepts because human beings gravitate toward that. But Buddhism uses those stories in order to indicate to a human that very mental condition and uses it as a teaching tool to understand something very mundane, very earthbound, right? But all of Buddhism is about the mind and the way it operates, and to live this life, this human samsaric life, to its utmost. It's not about anything fanciful outside of this earthly life. That's why Buddha and Buddhism and that life condition, that mental life condition, is something only achieved here and now in this human form. It's not some other cloudy, mystical thing. It's something we embody. But nonetheless, when you read these stories, it's very easy to get fanciful and go, you know, la 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 la. Right? So easy to misinterpret by somebody who's already trained to see magic in everything. What's that saying? If all you're taught is hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So, let's continue. I hope I'm staying on topic here. I do not know what form this sutra may exist in India, in the Dragon Killing's Palace. Yep, 6 versions, 2 volumes. In addition, these sutras, there are the Agama Sutras, the Correct and Equal Sutras, and the Wisdom Sutras, which run to 5,000 or 7,000 volumes. But even though we may not see or hear of any of these various sutras, if we read so much as a single word or phrase of the Lotus Sutra, it is just as though we were reading every word of all these various sutras. So Nichiren wants to give us confidence that no, you don't have to spend the rest of your life on pilgrimage after pilgrimage to go and find these old extant works wherever they are stored, temples, private collections, whatever, so that you can too understand each one of these concepts, as I was suggesting perhaps earlier in study. It's not necessary that you do that, because in Myoho Renge-kyo, you are resonating those teachings in that moment. And you may be able to practice that way, and that more power to you. That's great. As Nichiren might say, that would be the reward of causes you've made throughout your previous moments of existence. Somehow in your collective energy, your momentum of life from which you came already had the rewards of knowing these concepts. Wow, that's amazing. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. But for a plain old guy like me, I needed to read as many other sutras as I could find in order to firmly make the ferment of my chanting of Myoho Renge Kyo deeply meaningful to me. I haven't read every sutra out there. I haven't read the 84,000 or more teachings and commentaries, but I've read a good bit of them, enough so that I'm very secure in my understanding of Myoho Renge Kyo. So maybe that's the point. It is like the two characters that comprise the name for India, Gashi, or the name for Japan, Nihon. The two characters that make up the name Gashi encompass the 5 regions of India, we've heard him talk like this before, the 16 great states, the 500 middle-sized states, the 10,000 small states, the countless smaller states, like scattered grains of millet, all with their great lands and great mountains, their plants and trees, and their people and animals. Or it is like a mirror, which may be only 1 inch or 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, or 5 inches in size, but which can reflect the image of a person, whether that person is 1 foot or 5 foot tall, or a mountain, whether it is 10 feet, 20 feet, or 100 feet, or 1,000 feet high. Thus, when we read the above passage from the Lotus Sutra, we know that all people who hear this sutra will, without a single exception, attain Buddhahood. Oh, that's quite relieving, isn't it? It makes our job of bodhisattva far more simple to begin with, I would say. It's very easy to get someone to hear Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, or even to repeat it, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. But invariably, a waterfall of questions come after that moment, because you're enlightening them. The moment they say Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, their mind explodes. Now, their personality will certainly jump in the way of what happens with that explosion. They might be completely taken aback and go silent and leave, only to return later with questions. Or they'll do a bunch of research for themselves to know what the heck just happened. Or they may feel such an urgency to, what does that mean? They'll say it even without thinking, what does that mean? Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Okay, now tell me what that means. And now the onus on your bodhisattva practice gets real. Says, how do you teach somebody knowing that you're not misleading them? That's the great filial responsibility we have to our practice of Myoho Renge Kyo, right? All living beings in the 9 worlds and the 6 paths differ from one another in their minds. Exactly what I'm saying, I suppose. Where are we time-wise? For example, 2 persons, 3 persons, 100 or 1,000 people may all have faces about a foot in length, but no 2 look exactly alike, right? Their minds differ in the same way, and therefore so do their faces. How much... Well, that's interesting. So Nichiren is saying, because their minds differ, so do their faces. That's a very Buddhist thing to say. And without going crazy deep into this, I'll just say, because, as you've heard me say repeatedly, we are manifest from energy. Everything is manifest from energy, right? All mass and energy are equitable. So, by that very logic, the energies of which we are manifest have certain characteristics, no less characteristics than is visible in the structure of our faces. Of course, our bodies, the places we're born, to the families we're born, to the cultures we're born, to the languages we speak, so on and so forth, right? All of it is precipitous from the Nidana, the energy to mass instantiation. Right? So that's an interesting way to say that. Because people are different minds, they have different faces. The two are not independent. They are codependent, if you will. Right? Their minds differ, and therefore so do their faces. See, that's, to me, one sentence like that can send me down several rabbit holes. Perhaps for you, that's yeah, I get that, right? Good for you. I wish I could do that more often. How much greater still is the difference between the minds of 2 persons, of 10 persons, of all living beings in the 6 paths and the 9 worlds. Oh my God. As we would say in Buddhism, innumerable, immeasurable. So it is that some love the cherry blossoms and some love the moon. Some prefer sour things and some prefer bitter. Some like little things and some favor big. People have varied tastes. Some prefer good and some prefer evil, lower world tendencies. There are many kinds of people, and to varying degrees, obviously. But though they differ from one to another in such ways, once they enter into the Lotus Sutra, they all become like a single person in body and a single person in mind. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So there it is. The Buddha that you reach is the same Buddha that I reach. The only thing that's different is our path. And that path is different because we are different. It's that simple. And that complex, right? This is just like the myriad different rivers that, when they flow into the ocean, all take on a uniformly salty flavor, or like the many kinds of birds that, when they approach Mount Sumeru, all assume the same golden hue. Thus Devadatta, who had committed 3 cardinal sins, and Rahula, who observed all of the 250 precepts, both alike became Buddhas. Their paths were markedly different. And both King Wonderful Adornment, who held erroneous views, and Shariputra, who held correct views, equally received predictions that they would attain Buddhahood. This is because, in the words of the passage quoted earlier, quote, not a one will fail to attain Buddhahood. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So you could almost see Myoho Renge Kyo as the great equalizer of sorts, of all the various instantiations of life. All have in common a view of the life, independent of their various little differences. There is this overarching process that is completely equanimous, even though every manner of difference precipitates from it, the life force, never changes. It is always completely clear, right? And that's the Buddha mind state. A mind state which, I will again remind you, only occurs where the mind occurs, which is in this human form. The mind is an emergent property of our human consciousnesses, our existence. In the Amida and other sutras expounded during the first 40 and more years of the Buddha's preaching life, Shariputra is said to have achieved great rewards by reciting the name of Amida Buddha 1,000,000 times in the space of 7 days. But since these sutras were repudiated as teachings belonging to the period when the Buddha had, quote, not yet revealed the truth, end quote, such recitation is, in fact, as meaningless as if one were to boil water for 7 days and then throw it into the ocean. Well, first of all, after 7 days, there would be no water left if you were truly boiling it, right? So it would be a meaningless act to then turn the pan over into the ocean. It's quite an analogy. Lady Vaidela, and this is a very important point that Nichiren is kind of jumping right through here, is that before the Lotus Sutra, there was tremendous scholarship. But in this latter day of the law, in these modern times, to be a scholar of those early teachings, really, it doesn't amount to much. Not in comparison to the culminating teachings of the Lotus Sutra. Only those teachings will have an effect to anyone who participates, reads, hears them. No matter how much scholarship they have in earlier teachings, they will not attain this Buddhahood, this enlightenment that we now in this time can attain. Because those teachings were just provisional. At that time, they may have accomplished a great deal for those people. But with the level of distractions and so on that we are living in today, they're inadequate. They simply won't get us there. Where are we time-wise? A little bit further. Lady Videhi, by reading the Meditation Sutra, was able to reach the stage known as the realization of the non-birth and non-extinction of all phenomena. Right? And Nagarjuna goes into this way in depth. This is where teachings about emptiness and the self, and not self come into being. And this is it can get very monotonous and mind-bending to read Nagarjuna's treatises on these. But it's through those teachings he was able to get through to people of a capacity that could understand that the whole issue of a self or a not self is a non-issue. That the Buddha mind, the reality of the life force, is that nothing exists but potential, not instantiation, no differentiation, just raw, unformed, non-namarupa, in the words of the Nidana. Almost like a state of expectation. But no what, when, where, why, time, not. So the issue of self or not self is not a non-issue. That's why not self points to the fact that your whole grappling with something not being assumes being. If you can remove the whole idea being, then you're there in what would be the suchness of no suchness, really. Very hard for us in samsara to conceptualize that space. But for a while in Buddhist teachings, that was a very, very important concept. This is why that concept was taught for so many years. And there still exist today branches of Buddhism that are stuck there. But they're not going to get to Buddhahood now because that teaching was preparatory. They need to get past that, right? But since the Buddha cast this sutra aside when he said that he would now honestly discard expedient means, which is what he says in the Innumerable Meanings Sutra, the opening to the Lotus Sutra, unless Lady Videhi were to believe in the Lotus Sutra, she must revert to her former status as an ordinary woman. In other words, those teachings, though they may be entertaining to the intellectual, will not lead that person to their enlightenment, their awakening. It's kind of sad when you think about it. One's acts of great good are nothing to rely on. If one fails to encounter the Lotus Sutra, of what avail can they be? So even if you're a generous person and you're well liked, ultimately, those are temporary states. They're samsaric states. They're attachment states. Unless those acts are accompanied by a desire to single-mindedly fuse with your Buddha and act as a bodhisattva in your acts of goodness through the Myoho Renge-kyo, then your good acts will, in the end, amount to nothing. They'll just be temporary baubles. They won't be permanence of reward. In permanence, I hesitate to use that word because we don't like that in Buddhism. Nothing's permanent. But your causation, your awakening, and your ability to inspire awakening in others, right? Our Bodhisattva way will fall short without the Buddha way, without the Buddha mind, without the evolution of thought that gets us to Buddha. That is a lasting, I will say, rather than permanent, a lasting effect to those who practice. And how do those who practice make that effect last? It's a lifetime reference. It will last until you are no longer. Your mind is no longer, and then it doesn't matter, right? Nor should one lament having committed acts of great evil, for if only one practices the one vehicle, then one can follow in the footsteps of Devadatta in attaining Buddhahood. All this is because the sutra passage that declares, quote, not a one will fail to attain Buddhahood, end quote, was not spoken in vain. So I'm going to stop there. This has been a really good example now that I've gotten to that point of what I was saying earlier. This is one simple statement in the Lotus Sutra. In fact, it's part of a statement. Not a one will fail to attain Buddhahood. Nichiren is going at this statement from different scholars, from his own study, from other scholarship, bodhisattvas, great teachers, right? Miao Lo, so on. And he's demonstrating the depth of teachings of Shakyamuni's lifetime that support that statement, that simple statement in the Lotus Sutra. To me, that's a map on how to study. Nichiren is showing us how to study the Lotus Sutra and the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. By example, right? This is a bodhisattva at work. Oh, and this next part, where are we? Yeah, I got to save it for the next part. But for my my little sanghas in the UK who have been asking about this whole afterlife thing, listen to this sentence. Some may wonder where the spirit of the late Abutsubo may be at this moment. But using the clear mirror of the Lotus Sutra to reflect his image, I, Nichiren, can see him among the assembly on Eagle Peak, seated within the treasure tower of many treasures Buddha and facing toward the east. Oh man, that's so good. We'll talk some more in part 2. Thanks so much for being here. You guys are amazing. I'm so proud of your practice. Don't forget, all of these are the audio portion of these videos are offered as podcasts, right? Under the label The Buddhahood Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. So if it's easier for you to just listen to these discussions without my lovely face accompanying please do so. I know for a lot of you who are very busy, the podcasts are invaluable, and it's been taking off. It's over 5,000 downloads, so a lot of people are getting the information that way. And it's also easy because you download it to listen to it anytime you want without having to go online and search in the vast compendium that is the channel's video library. Anyway, thank you very much for being here. You guys make my practice exciting, and I continue to be extremely grateful. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Please take care of your health and be kind. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Hey, thank you for being here. Did you know there's a third way you can help support this channel, and it won't cost you a cent? Yep. If you are not able to be a patron on Patreon or use the PayPal me at .com at Sifu Sylvain because you don't have the financial fortune to help support this channel right now, you, as I say, always support this channel by watching, but you can also help us grow so that maybe one day we can get over 10,000 subscribers and YouTube will grace us with monetization. It's not a lot, but if you can make sure you're subscribed and share a video like a simple one, just go into the search criteria and type monk, and you'll have a video that'll come up that's been up for years about what is a monk. You know, it's called monk, who, how, where, something like that. That might be a great introduction to somebody who doesn't understand what a monk is to begin with. It's a tool. Use this channel as a tool to help you with your bodhisattva practice, and share a video to somebody who you think, oh, I know somebody who'll benefit from watching this. And in that way, you can help us grow. And that's a really good way to help your practice along as well. So just wanted to drop that in on you in case that's something that you might find useful. Take care of yourself again, and I'll see you soon. Bye.